Hello viewer, this is Christian Religious Education, Form 1, Lesson 3 with your teacher Mr. John Gatuma. In our previous lesson, we were discussing on the Bible, and I gave you some assignment to go and try at home so that we can review them this lesson. This question was, name 5 reasons why the Bible is referred to as a library of books. And these are the reasons why we say that the Bible is a library. The Bible contains many books. This is the Old and New Testament books. Number 2, the Bible was written by different authors at different times in history. Number 3, the reason why we say that the Bible is a library. The Bible contains different messages to different audiences. 4, the Bible contains 66 books that are divided in between Old and New Testament. The Old Testament containing 39 and the New Testament containing 27 books. So the second question is, what are the examples of the literary forms that were used in writing the Bible? The forms of literary forms, they are the styles that were used in writing the Bible. These are the prayers. And a good example of the prayers is we have the Nehemiah. We have the love songs. A good example being the Songs of Solomon. We have the legislative text, and a good example being Leviticus. We have the prophetic speeches, a good example being Jeremiah. This is just mentioning but a few. So in today's lesson, we are going to continue with the Bible, but the subtopic that we are going to dwell on is the major divisions of the Bible. The Bible is divided into 2 broad sections, and this is the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament contains 39 books, and the New Testament contains 27 books. So the name testament, the term testament in this case, it refers to as a covenant or a treaty or a pact. So the Old Testament, starting with the Old Testament we have said it contains 39 books that are accepted by Christians worldwide. Others, such as the Roman Catholic Church, has 45 books in total as their canon. The term canon means the accepted books, or rather the books which are regarded to have the authority for the Christian living. This is to say, they have 6 extra books as their canon, and the 6 extra books which we are calling them the canon, it is referred to as the deuterocanonical, or rather apocrypha. The deuterocanonical means the extra books which are the canons, and the apocrypha means the hidden, or rather the secret. Examples of the deuterocanonical, or rather the apocrypha books include 1. Tobit, Judith, Ecclesiasticus, Baruch, Maccabees 1, Maccabees 2, and lastly the Book of Wisdom. The books of the Bible that we are going to deal with, we're going to start with the Old Testament books in order. It is broadly divided into 3, that is the history, wisdom, and the prophecy. On the history part, we have 5 books we're going to deal with. That is the Book of Law, the books that were written by Moses. They are known as the Torah. Example, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. On the pre-exile book, or rather the books before the exile, we have Joshua, we have Judges, we have Ruth, we have Samuel, we have First Samuel, Second Samuel, First Kings, Second Kings, First Chronicles, Second Chronicles. The post-exile, we have Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. On the wisdom part of the Old Testament, we have the five books of wisdom, or rather the poetry and praise. These are Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Songs of Solomon. We have the prophecy of prophetic books divided into two. We are going to discuss them in detail. We have major prophets and the minor prophets. The major prophets, there are 5 in number. We have Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentation, Ezekiel, and Daniel. We have the minor prophets. The minor prophets, they are divided into 2, post-exile and pre-exile and post-exile. The pre-exile, we have Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah. On the post-exile, we have Haggai, Zechariah, Malachi. There are 3. Both comprises of 17 books. We are going to discuss them in detail. The major division of the book into Old Testament and the New Testament can be seen in this illustration. See the representation of the books. That is the law containing 5, the history containing 12 books, the poetry containing 5 books, the major prophetic books containing 5, minor prophetic books containing 12, the gospel books containing 4, the history book in the New Testament containing 1, the Paul letters and or the epistle to the churches containing 9. We have the Paul letters to certain individual. We have general letters 9, and then we have the Revelation being the last. We are going to discuss them in details. The Old Testament is broadly divided into 4. The first major category of the Old Testament, we have the Pentateuch, or which is also known as the Torah or the Law Book. The books were written by Moses, and therefore we can also call them the books of Moses, because the author is the Moses. It contains the law of God to the Israelites and their history from the creation to the promised land. It carries the history of man, or rather the Israelites, from the time of creation to the time of the promised land, that is in Canaan. Examples of the books of Torah or the law. We have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. The reason why we call them Pentateuch, it is because looking at these books, there are 5. And Pentateuch is derived from the word penta, which means 5. Therefore, the first 5 books in the Bible, they are known as the Pentateuch. The second category, we have the books of history. The books of history, they are 12 in number, and they record, as the name suggests, they record the history of Israelites from the time they entered to the promised land, that is Canaan, to their time in exile, that is in Babylon. Examples of this book, we have Joshua, we have Judges, we have Ruth, we have 1st and 2nd Samuel, we have 1st and 2nd Kings, we have 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Esther. the 12 books that record the history of Israel from the time they entered to the promised land, Canaan, to the time they went to Babylon as the exiles. So these books, the historical books, it can be with some repetition. In other words, the time they were written. We have Genesis, followed by Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles. You have Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. The third category of the Old Testament, we have prophetic books. And the prophetic books, as the name suggests, were written by the prophets. There are 17 books in number. These 17 books, they are again subdivided into two major categories. We have one, the major prophetic books, and minor prophetic books. These include the major prophetic books. The reason why we call them major prophetic books, it is because it covers a larger content, because these prophets lived for a long period of time, and therefore they are called a longer content, or rather the message. Such books include Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentation, Ezekiel, and Daniel. The second categories in the prophetic books, we have the minor prophetic books. And the reason why we call them the minor prophetic books, it is because they were written by the minor prophets, and the minor prophets cover short period of time. This period of time is influenced by the time they lived. They lived for a short period of time, and therefore the message was short. Examples of the minor prophetic books, we have Hosea, have Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk, Haggai, Zephaniah, Malachi, and Zechariah. So these are the 12 books that forms the minor prophetic books in the Bible. The fourth and last category of the Old Testament, we have the books of poetry, which is also known as the writings or the wisdom books. We call them the wisdom books or poetry books or writing books because these books contain the wisdom, or rather the forms of writing here is in form of poetry or the writings. Examples of the prophetic books of poetry or the wisdom books we have, there are 5 in number, and this is one: Psalms, Proverbs, Job, Ecclesiastes. Don't confuse with the extra books, that is Ecclesiasticus. It is Ecclesiastes. Songs of Solomon. Also these books, the books in the Bible that we call, the second part is the New Testament. Apart from the Old Testament, you have the New Testament, which contains 27 books. The 27 books are again subdivided into 4, and this is 1, biographical, or the gospel books. We call them biographical books because it records the history, and we call them the gospel books because it carries the good news. So these are the first 5 books that tells the history and the ministry of Jesus Christ. So the gospel means the good news, and the good news or biographical books contains the message of salvation. Example of these books, we have Matthew, the first books in the New Testament, followed by Mark, Luke in that line, and finally John. These first four books, it records the history of salvation. The second category in the New Testament, we have the historical books. The historical books, these are the books that record the history of the early church founded by St. Paul. As the name suggests, history, because it records the history of early church, the churches that were formed by St. Paul. And it was written by St. Luke. The St. Luke was an eyewitness of the ministry of Jesus. It shows that the salvation was universal, because you say universal because the salvation was for both Jews and the Gentiles. Therefore, a good example we have the Acts of Apostle. The Act of Apostle, as the name suggests, Act, it contains the history of the early church and also the history of the disciples. The third categories in this line, we have the epistles, or rather the letters. The epistles, they are the 21 books. We have 21 letters that were written by different people addressing to the early church, to certain individuals. Most of these books, they were written by Paul. And examples of these books, we have the first category, we have Pauline letters. As the name suggests, Paul was written by St. Paul. Examples, we have Romans, 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, we have Galatians, we have Ephesians, we have Philippians, we have Colossians, we have 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. The second type of letters, we have pastoral letters, which is also known as the shepherd letters. We call them pastoral, the shepherd letters, because these letters, they address to a certain shepherd or a certain leader of the church. You have Hebrews, you have Titus, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Philemon. They are those letters which address to every person, and they are known as the general or universal letters, or Catholic epistles. The word Catholic means universal. And these letters, they were written they are not actually addressing to one person, but a general church. Example, we have James, we have 1st and 2nd Peter, we have 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Finally, we have Jude. The last category in the New Testament, we have prophetic books. The prophetic books are also known as the Apocalypse. The Apocalypse is a Greek term which means revelation or disclosure. The prophetic book, it uses many symbols and metaphors. And this is the last book of the New Testament. Example being Revelation. Revelation is the last book. In summarizing these books, or rather these books of the New Testament, it's good we have look at this illustration. We talk of Gospels. In a summary, you can say we have 4 books, the Gospels, the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. In the history, we have the book of Acts of Apostles. Letters by Paul, they are known as the Pauline letters. We have Romans, First and Second Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, First and Second Thessalonians, First and Second Timothy, Titus, and Philemon. The general letters, which are also known as the Catholic or the Universal, we have Hebrews, James, First and Second Peter, First, Second, and Third John. Lastly, Jude. The last book or last category, we have prophecy. Prophetic book in the New Testament is only one, Revelation. And we have said it's also known as the Apocalypse. Having discussed these categories, major division of the Bible, we have come to the end of our lesson today, and I want to leave you with some assignment. This assignment you go and try at home, go and research on this, and in the next lesson we shall discuss them together. First question, I want you to try. What is the difference between the major and the minor prophetic books in the Bible? Question 2. Outline the 5 books that comprises Pentateuch, which is also known as the Torah or the books of Moses. So give 5 books. We said Pentateuch is the first 5 books. So name these books. So we shall discuss this one in the next lesson. So thank you for listening and following this lesson that is being aired by Elimu TV, your TV station where you watch and learn. See you in the next lesson. I have been your teacher, Mr. John Gatuma. Thank you.